the computer on? Okay, he's waiting? Okay, we are on the Gemara. Nun Gimel Amar Aleph. Say, but should we move the table easier, more comfortable for you? Okay. You could protect your back. Okay. Okay, we are on Nun Gimel Amar Aleph. Chodesh Tov to everybody. Be a beautiful month. Tana Rabbanon. Hayu Mahalech Chutz L'Krach. We're continuing in what we said yesterday. When you see a fire, the question is who made the fire? Was it made by a Jew or made by a Gentile? As we said, that if it's fire that's made by a Gentile on Shabbat or a fire that's made by a Gentile after Shabbat, I can't, and I'm not able to say a bracha borei moreish on that fire. And I can't, and now I see a fire. So here, here's the case. Say that again? Right. Yesterday we left with the see a fire in the hand of a child right after Shabbat. So we said that check it, find out if that kid is Jewish or not. If the kid is Jewish, then you could say the bracha. If the kid is not Jewish, you cannot say a bracha on that fire. That's what we ended off yesterday, correct?
What was the purpose of saying that on the fire?
Again, okay, Motzei Shabbat, the Chachamim said that we should remember the.
Is that Rosh Chodesh day?
Today's Rosh Chodesh, Yosef Tzaddik.
It's a one-day Rosh Chodesh, right?
Double header. Today. And
oh, wow, also tomorrow then.
yes.
Okay, good to know.
Yes. So the reason why the Motzei Shabbat, Saturday night after Shabbat, Hashem gave Adam Harishon the mindset, the thought to take two rocks and to put them together. And as a result of putting those two rocks together, he brought out fire from those two rocks. And the rabbis say, and we should remember this, recognize and thank Hashem for creating the fire. And the way Rashi learns was specifically thanking Hashem for fire that's given for the purpose of illumination, that we're able to see, that we could use the fire to see. The fact that fire is used for other purposes, we're not saying a blessing on that use of a fire.
So when you say on Saturday night, and you look at your fingers, whichever some symbolism there is or whatever, for whatever reason, the purpose is to see.
Exactly. The purpose is to thank Hashem for the ability to benefit from the seeing of light. Therefore, a blind person will not say the bracha, Dave.
Just wanted to ask you that question.
Right. A blind person will not say the bracha because he can't see.
Well, that's the question. To what degree? If he sees light, if light is exposed and he's not complete, is that completely blind?
What level? Right. So it would depend if he's able to have a certain amount of benefit, that he could see, that the benefit of light, he's able to see. Again, he's able to see. It's not on all light we say a bracha. It's the light of a fire, right? So he's able to see. If he could see with that light, he could see the difference between his fingernail and his flesh. That means he's having a certain benefit. Or the way the Gemara gives the case, if you would bring 2 coins, if that blind man, Mone Akiva, if there would be 2 coins of Canadian coin, we usually and American, and he can make it. That means he's had enough benefit. But if he can't, if his level of blindness, there's something like in America, something called what's called legally blind. Everyone who's legally blind does not mean necessarily that they can't see.
Right.
There's only certain levels of. So therefore, it would depend on that situation and what can he have that amount of benefits.
So what is our perspective when we do? What are we looking at?
Right.
Difference between the shadows and not the shadows. So
Right. So what? There are different opinions. What are you looking at? There were those that says you're looking to see the lines in your palm. but that doesn't seem to be the more prevalent. The more prevalent is to see the difference between your fingernail and your flesh, that I could see, this is my nail. That now, what's the purpose of that? The purpose is if I could see that, that's just a sign that I have the light is significant. If I could see the difference between it's only a sign of what level of light there is. If I could see the difference, that would mean that I'm having that light is a light of benefit. Because if the light does not give me, let's say it's a little flame, and that little flame I cannot, it's not eminent. What do you say? It enhances my vision. Meaning I can't even see the difference between my fingernail and my flesh, which is all. Therefore, I cannot say a blessing. The rabbi said you do not say a blessing on that level of light. So the idea of looking at your fingernail and your flesh is just to show that you met the criteria, the minimum amount of light.
Which you say is what?
The minimum amount of light is that if I could see the difference between my fingernail and my flesh, that shows me that I'm having benefits from the light.
I heard that we just need to see on the nails the fire reflecting to us, like to the nails, like.
I presume when you're saying that, because if you could see the nail, that means you're seeing a difference. This is my nail and this is my flesh.
Otherwise, it's the best thing to do, right?
What's the best thing to do?
To make the distinction between the nails and the flesh.
That seems to be the more common. I mean,
No, do we need to do that to get yourself the mitzvah? Because when we do in shul, for like a year or more than that, I was doing in shul, and then like it was too far for me. Well, I was saying to it.
Right. So if it's too far from you, it would seem that's not good, because you would not. Now you don't know if they would close the lights,
No,
and if the lights would be closed, then you would be
And there are
standing.
those that close, and there's some that say absolutely no books.
Okay. Right. I mean,
Well, we've seen a lot of opinions.
Right.
We've never seen a total consensus.
correct.
I haven't seen.
Right. Growing up, no one ever closed the lights.
no.
I never remember.
And I haven't seen it go into consensus between what people typically in shul will look at their nails and will look at the darkness and look at the reflection and so on and so forth. But if you ask 10 people what exactly you're looking for, they don't know.
They don't. Right. But the truth of the matter is, if let's say there's a nice size light, a nice size, and I'm right next to it, I really don't need to look at my nails, because I know I'm getting the benefit. Meaning, the point is, let's say there's a nice torch in front of the shul, or there's a nice, I'm standing right nearby. Is there a need for me to really look at my, now again, once we have the custom.
Depending what the outlook is.
I'm saying, like the way we're explaining, the outlook of looking at the custom of looking at your nails, the Gemara is going to say one rabbi, he looked at different coins. One rabbi looked, maybe that's probably was looking at his nails. We'll see in the Gemara more about this. Yes. Right. So that's a discussion.
We see it from far.
Right.
So we make a distinction. That light actually.
So that's the question. Can you say a bracha on these lights?
But what makes us the distinction is that light.
Right. So I'm saying, but the blessing is not that light. If you hold, see, that's the question. Can you say a bracha on a light bulb? That's a discussion also. You don't really see the flame directly. So there's a whole discussion about.
You have it specifically in the Gemara what light they're referring to.
Yes, the Gemara. We're going to see. As we're going to see, we'll get to it more about the light. But that just sheds a little light. Hope you enjoy the on the matter. What?
It was a long time ago for sure. The light was the fire. And they were talking about,
Right, but that's where the rabbi said said that's what you light. That's the way you say the bracha on. A similar question would be on a menorah, on an electric menorah for Hanukkah. The rabbis instituted on a flame, on a wick, that type of situation, on a wick, a flame. Now you're going to go ahead and use electric menorah, so that's not what the rabbis instituted the obligation of saying, of lighting menorah. So therefore, that's why we won't use electric menorah to,
Well, it's not often that we get to a point that we're elaborating on the putting in. And that's why getting to this point at this particular time is worthy of elucidating that subject. What are we really doing?
right. So the Shulchan Aruch, just that you brought up the point, Mr. Haber, the Shulchan Aruch says the custom is to look at the palms of your hand and at your nails. So he puts in the palms of your hand
That would be this.
and this
And
and
the nails would be this.
exactly.
Now-
And
now here I'm looking at the palms of my hand at a different point than I'm curling it. I'm looking at my,
right,
and maybe one first, one second, or maybe one both the same. So far, we don't have that answer.
But what about that? Let's say I go one time on the edge, that way. I check on my nails, I remove them, I keep check that out. So I don't see the light anymore, and I put them back. That I have a real and
I mean, you didn't see and then you put
now.
it,
So I go, I see the light, I remove it, and I go back and I remove it without the light. I check to make sure like what's the difference, and I go back to
so your question is, you check before the bracha, after, but what's the question?
now we do the bracha.
Did the bracha and then you,
But we have to have ana, right?
right, you did the bracha,
So I put my hands, I
Right.
see what's doing to my nails, and
so you see the difference.
I remove it and I put it back to have a real ana.
Okay, I mean, you moved it because you, not to have benefit and then to have benefit?
No, to have, but to make sure I make distinction.
By moving it away, that's it, by then
Yeah.
moving it back.
Where's
That's
the
interesting.
Gemara?
Yeah.
What is
The Chavetz, right, the Chavetz Chaim says, he says like this, the custom to look at the nails is to show, that shows that you're able to see the difference, that you have a certain amount of benefit. Like we said, the nails, if I could see my nails among my flesh, that means I'm having a certain amount of benefit. If I can't notice my nails, that means I'm not having proper benefit. And why do they use the nails? Because the nails are a siman bracha. The nails, why specifically use a nail? Because your nails constantly grow. And that's a blessing. Growth is a blessing. And therefore, we go ahead and we look at the custom evolved to use the nails. And why do we look at the palms? Why did the Shulchan Aruch said you look at the palm? You look at the palms because the palms have these lines. They also are signs of blessing. All these lines on your hand. That explains a little bit about that. We'll see more as the Gemara, but that
It has been said that the nails at one time were covered all of Adam was covered with nails.
Right.
And they bring that up as some type of a gesture to show that when we were first created, we were created with a nail covering.
obviously there's a lot of mystical
There's a lot of-
what behind that idea. Exactly.
Like I said, if we were to go together and we said, well, no two people would do the same thing.
Right, but now I think we have a good understanding of
Yeah.
what's
Yeah.
going on. What are we
Yeah.
trying to, on a
Nails-
basic
nails,
level,
Flesh, light,
palm,
bone.
right? We're having benefit. The key is benefit. That's, you need to thank Hashem for giving us the light, the benefit of light of fire, and therefore we have to,
That's good enough for us.
that's good enough for us. There's a lot of other, I think as long as we know that, I think we're good.
We're good.
It's like a guy, you say a bracha on food. You have to know, you have a mind, you're saying what you're saying. There's a lot of mystical ideas. Let's say, like they say, when you pray, there's a lot going on in the prayers. There's a lot of mystical things hidden. But at least have in mind the words that you're saying. You know the translation, know the basic. First, we got to know the basic.
Good. Very
Okay.
Good. Nice to see.
Now let's continue in the Gemara. Tana Rabbanan. Morning, Akiva. How you doing? Good. Yeah. Tana Rabbanan. Mahalei chutz l'krach. A guy was walking outside the city. V'ro or. You have it, Yaron?
Yeah.
Mr. Haber, you have it?
I think
And that was where I showed you this morning, early this morning. Torah Rabbanan. The first word of the line is lakrach. And he was going outside the city. And he sees a fire. Im ava kifia ava kifia kivshon.
he's a regular person.
A regular Jew. He's coming. He's outside the city. And he sees a fire inside the city. And where is the fire? And the fire is the size of a furnace. That it's a tremendous size, very big
I
fire.
don't know, the furnace, is it a big furnace?
Right.
Overwhelmingly large furnace?
Very good. So the commentary says, Mr. Haber, that a furnace is like a synonym, so to speak, refers to a big oven
Mhm.
that you use to make, let's say, plaster. You would burn the bricks and the bricks will be burnt and be melted. And then you would use that for building materials. You want to pass me the article for a second?
Is it the heat that
No,
way-
not that thing.
where it
It's the heat,
burns
right. You have a fire, and let's understand what they're doing with the furnace.
So
The
the
fir-
very purpose of the
furnace-
fire seems to be to generate enough
heat to
in
melt,
order to melt the plastic.
right, the stone and turn it into plaster.
Exactly.
Right,
So he needs enough heat. He has a fire, and it's a small fire. It won't accomplish that.
right. That's why
But
it's a
that's what he took, and that they said.
right. But now we have to identify what's the purpose of the fire. Because if the purpose of the fire is light, then I can say a bracha. If the purpose of light is just to melt the stones, I can't say a bracha, even though it's a fire. But the purpose of the fire is not just like if I make a fire for cooking purposes. Let's say I turn on my stove. I had my stove on I turn on my stove the whole after Shabbat. I said Baruch Hamabtu Bekodesh Shachol, and I turned on my fire of my stove, and I'm cooking some macaroni and cheese. Now can I go ahead and say Bore Moresh on that fire? I can't. Rashi says I can't. Why can't I say Bore Moresh on that? The Gemara says because that fire was not made for viewing purposes. It was made for some other purpose. It was made to cook.
Because you have primary, secondary, tertiary objectives, and depending which one you're picking.
Exactly. So that's what the Gemara is saying. So the Gemara is saying this light of this furnace is used for something else, and therefore the Gemara says, now we're gonna right, and we're gonna see an opinion that says you could say a bracha on the light of the furnace, and the Gemara is going to try to explain what's the case. Different story, different case. That's what the Gemara is now. That's the intro into our Gemara. So im ava kafia kivshan. If it was now here, this case is he was walking, right. So now here it doesn't say that this case is the fire of a furnace. This case is, I want to clarify this point. This case is you see a fire. It's the size of that you would use for a stove. It could be whether it's being used for this stove or not, you don't know. You're at a distance. I see a large fire, and this fire is the fire that would have been the size to be used for a furnace. It could be a barn fire. Now, so the Gemara says, "Im ava kefia kivshan." If you see a fire and it's large, the size of the opening of a fire of a furnace, so mevorach alav. Then you would go ahead and say a bracha. The im lav, if it's not that large, ein mevorach alav. If it's not, then you will not say a bracha. So what Rashi says, that if you see such a nice fire, if it's such a large fire, so if you made that fire, why did people make that large fire? For the purpose of seeing, viewing, illuminating the area. So therefore, the Gemara says over here,
Light, not heat.
it's light, it's not heat. Right. Because people would not make that size fire for heating purposes, or this type of size of a fire is the fire that people would use now to illuminate. That right, so to speak, fire. That's case one. So it could be that it's clearly that it's not a fire of a furnace, but it's the size of a furnace. So that's the size of a fire people would use to light up the area.
Rabbi, to make a fire like that, but after Shabbat, the time, so probably was like during Shabbat.
Yeah, but even with light before Shabbat, as long as you lit it before the Shabbat, even if it's light, you said before in the Gemara, a fire that was lit before Shabbat, it's fine. Right, exactly. So therefore, you could say a bracha on such a fire. Now, Hanichada, we learned in a Braita, or Shel Kivshan, we have the fire of a furnace. And now we're talking specifically about a furnace, not the size of a fire similar to the opening of a furnace, but the size of the fire of a furnace, of an actual furnace. So the Gemara says, okay, so one second, I just want to see something over here. So the Gemara says, if you went ahead and so the fire of a furnace, so one bright says Mevarchan Alav. You say the bracha Borei Morei Ha'esh. You say the bracha Borei Morei on the light of a furnace. V'tanya idach ein Mevarchan Alav. And we have a different bright there that says you cannot say a bracha on the light of the furnace. So now,
What is set the stage?
what's the case?
What's the case?
So the case is the light of a furnace. What do you say?
We know what the fire.
We know what the fire is made for. It's a fire of a furnace. It's not just a fire the size of the opening of a furnace. It's a size of it's a fire that's you're melting the stones with this fire. That's what you're doing with this fire. So therefore, that explains why I cannot say a bracha on the fire. The Braita says you can't say bracha on the fire of a furnace because the fire of a furnace is being used to melt the stones. I can't say a bracha. That makes a lot of sense. But there's a Braita that says I could say a bracha on that fire, and that's what the Gemara is trying to understand. It seems to be contradictory. It doesn't seem to fit. Why? How can we have a Braita that says that the fire of a furnace, they're manufacturing something, and they're in the manufacturing business. They're they're manufacturing these stones and they're melting these stones. How can I say a bracha on that? That's the Gemara's problem. It's a good question, right?
If you used it for one purpose, it could satisfy the need to say that.
If it's used for illumination purposes. But since it's used for other purposes, I should not be able to say a bracha. In the early commentators, we're going to see what you touched on before, Mr. Haber, secondary for primary. If it's made for multiple purposes, would you say a bracha on a fire that's made for multi-purpose, and one of them is for the purpose of illumination?
It's a good general question.
That's
It's a good general question. If you have something that you are using for its primary purpose, it's unquestionably acceptable because the primary purpose was satisfied. But if it's not satisfied and it was used for secondary purposes, does that allow you to say that?
Right. So let me explain, Darren, what Mr. Haber is. If I have a light, and the light is serving two purposes.
Yes.
It's for, let's say, it's for heat, and it's for illumination.
That's right.
Would I have a right to say a blessing on that light, or not? And it could be even if if it's primarily for light, but if it's also clearly for heat, it would be a question. Can I say a blessing on such a light? Rashi takes position that if it's also used for lighting purposes, even if that's good enough to say a blessing, because even if the light is used for something else as well, but since you are using this light for illumination, so it's appropriate to say a blessing on such a light. You're thanking Hashem for creating this fire because it is serving this purpose of illumination. The fact that you're multitasking, multi-purpose, okay, beautiful, it's multi-purpose. That's Rashi's opinion.
I
Yes.
didn't understand about the first case and the second one. They're exactly the same. The first case, we were not sure what type of fire it was.
Right.
So we say if it was a fire for the oven,
No, so the first case of the Gemara is, I see a fire.
yes.
It's the size of, let's say, the opening of this oven.
And what did
And-
you say?
And meaning, but it's not, let's say, it's not necessarily a fire of an oven. It's a fire. I see a nice sized fire. So we say if you see this nice sized fire, that type of fire is used for lighting purposes. That's what the Gemara says. It's that type of fire. You see a big fire.
Yes.
People use that. You could rely on the fact that most people use this fire for lighting
We
purposes.
were not sure what it was. So if it was for lighting purposes, so we can do bracha. If it was for the other one,
Right. But the Gemara seems to be indicating that when you see a certain size of a fire, if it's a certain fire, if I'm outside a city and I look inside the city and I see a fire, and if the fire is a certain size of height of that type of fire is a fire that people use also for lighting purposes.
I think the operative here in that word is
also. Okay.
Also, right? I'm going also. I mean, it's a type of fire that people would use for lighting purposes.
So we have a machloket on that.
No, so machlokes is when
It's the one you mevarech.
right, that case is when it's actually a fire of a furnace, meaning you see the furnace in front of you. The first case was- The first case was not that I saw the fire of a furnace. I saw the fire the size. I'm not sure what it was.
But one say if you think it's for light, you can mevarech alav. But if you think it's for the furnace, you don't mevarech alav. And the second case is, we know is that you can mevarech, but you don't mevarech.
Okay, again, the second case was the case is clear. It's the light of, I'm standing in front of the furnace. I see the fire in the furnace. And one rabbi says, you say a blessing on this fire of the furnace. It's a furnace. And one rabbi says, I don't say a blessing. And the Gemara needs to clarify, are they arguing with each other or are they talking about different stages of the furnace? The early stage of the furnace or the later stage of it? The Gemara is going to say that the later stage of the furnace, towards the end, the fire is also used for illumination purposes. The beginning of the manufacturing process, the Gemara is going to say it's only used for melting purposes. And
So
the,
if you see from far, for sure it was melting purposes.
right, but
That's the best case, I don't know.
but again, but the first case of the Gemara is not that we saw a fire of a furnace. I see a fire, a certain size of a fire. It has the size of the opening of a furnace. Let's say the opening, the hole of the furnace has a certain size. If you see a certain size, if you see a fire a certain size, that fire is generally a fire that's used for illumination. It seems that it's not referring to the fire of a furnace. It's the fire that's the size of an opening of the furnace. And most probably it's not a fire of a furnace. The first case is not a fire of a furnace. It's a fire of similar size. It's the size of a furnace, but not of a furnace itself. That's how I would understand the difference. Okay, so now the Gemara says, lo kasha. There's no contradiction between the two. They're not arguing on each other.
If it was what they may be starting to refer to is even if it's not its primary purpose.
But if it's used also
but
for
if it's
illumination,
also used to
illuminate, then you say a bracha. Exactly. That's what the Gemara is going to say. So the Gemara says, the beginning of the melting of the bricks, then the fire is only purpose is to burn. Some say it's also very cloudy, very smoky, and therefore it's not, that light is not going to be used for illumination purposes at all. The beginning of the process. But halab is sof, when after the majority of the bricks have been already melted, and you only have a minority of the bricks left, then at that point, either it's very, very, very much less smoke, and therefore the light is used for illumination, or at that point, what they do is they make a large fire at the end of the manufacturing process. They make the fire very large to melt down what's left, and also at the same time to be used as an illumination for the area. And that's the Gemara, why you could say a blessing on that fire.
Rabbi, why let's go now to say bracha on the fire? Because it's the early days, the only time that we have a big fire.
Very
we
good.
have to say bracha because it was the purpose of light.
Morning Yosef Tzaddik. Again, the purpose of the lighting of the when you light, first again, the blessing on fire is only given on Saturday night when Adam did it, and or Yom Kippur, after Yom Kippur. Those are the 2 times of the year. Only Saturday, and also the Saturday night blessing is coming for the purpose of the light. Lag BaOmer, first of all, they're not doing it for the light. They're doing it for some other mystical purposes. Why the fire? Are they also doing it for the light? I don't think they're not interested in to be able to see things as a result of benefit by seeing the light that then now I could see as a result of that fire. But again, that's when the rabbis didn't, and you make a big fire, we're not going to make a blessing on, create a blessing for that. Now, Tani Chada, we have another one. Bright says, Or shel tanur v'shel kirayim, the fire of an oven, right? Tanur kirayim are different sizes of ovens. So one says mevorchen alav. I could say the bracha on the oven, the fire of the oven. The Tani idach, and one says I cannot say the bracha. Now, usually, what do we use of tanur and oven? We make bread, standard. We make bread in the oven. So we fire up. We make a nice fire. It gives off a nice heat. So now, if I'm using it for bread purposes, to cook, or to bake the bread, that's not for illumination purposes. So therefore, I should not be able to say a blessing on that fire. It's made for baking. It's not made for fire purposes. If you go to a bakery and they have the fire in the oven, that's not for lighting purposes. It's for
It was set up a certain way when you went there, and you found a way that we're supposed to use it for the different purpose.
right. But the question is, but what is the purpose of that fire?
Right.
So since the fire of the oven is not for illumination purposes, that's not your intent. When you made that fire for the oven, you made the fire because you wanted to bake the bread. So therefore, he says you cannot. Therefore, one writer says you cannot say a blessing. Now you want to go over to that fire Saturday night, and I want to use that fire to look at my fingernails and benefit and say a bracha. But that's not what that fire was made. That fire was made for some other purpose, not for. Good morning. Welcome. Thank you very much for joining. That fire was made for some other purpose. So that's why the Gemara says I cannot say the blessing on. But then the Gemara says there's another opinion that says I could say a blessing on. We're discussing on Saturday night, Moshe Shabbat, the bracha of Borim Moreh Haish. By the way, I always like to remind the people that before we learn, we have to say the Birkat HaTorah. L'asok b'divrei Torah, and I'll divrei Torah and Baruch Asher Baruch Habanu, and so we have just the Birkat HaTorah and then the pasukim that till Ani Avarchem. And so one writer says I could say the blessing on this fire of the oven, and one writer says I cannot say the blessing on the fire of the oven. So the Gemara explains what, depending on the case, are you in the beginning of the fire of the oven or at the end?
For sure, at the beginning we are fun because it would be nice to be fun.
But they're saying, going to say that the beginning is made for the baking. We're going to see what the Gemara's going to say something very interesting.
Because they wait for it to get very hot. So during that time, it will enjoy the fire.
But yeah, but the question is, but why are you making the fire? You're not making the fire for illuminate. In order to say a blessing on the fire Saturday night, it has to be a fire that's made for the purpose of helping your vision, to be able to see. You're benefiting by seeing something. So if the fire is made for some other purpose, it's made for heating purposes, you will not say the blessing, according to the way the Gemara is saying here. So the Gemara says, "Habetchila." The Gemara says the beginning, when you're heating up the oven, before you put the bread in, then that fire is just to heat the oven and to bake, and it's not for the purpose of lighting. Halib is sof. When the writer says you're able to say the blessing on the fire of the oven, is at the end, after you heated up the oven, and the bread is in the oven. What they would do is they would light little twigs at the opening of the oven, because they wanted the heat of the oven to remain contained in the oven. So they would light little fires over there.
Just make a new purpose for the light.
Right,
Yes.
right. And then they also would use those that light also for those twigs that they lit up to heat up to keep the heat inside. So that was also very user friendly to use for illumination purposes. And since
It was gradually redefined as primary.
right, it's purpose. It's another purpose that we have evolved at the end of the process, and because of that, it's fine. Be able to go ahead and say the blessing on that. The Meiri understands, or the Talmidei Rabbeinu Yonah says, that at the end of they would make the fire to, he says, that you wanted to look if the bread was baked properly. So you would make the fire at the end. This fire that you would make would be not for the purpose of baking purposes, like you want to check on your food, you want to see if the food came out well or not. So therefore, that fire at the end of the process, the fire was for the purpose of seeing the bread, seeing was it baked well. Do I got to keep the bread? Do I got to keep the bread longer inside the oven or not? So therefore, that's illumination purposes. To see, to check if the bread is baked well, I need to turn on the light. I'm not interested in heating up the bread. This light at the end of the process, it was for the light purpose of the fire at the end. So since the fire at the end was used for multi-purpose, so therefore I could say the blessing. It allowed you to say the bracha on such a clear. What's your first name again? Isaac. Is it clear? Therefore, you could say a blessing on such a fire. Okay. Now the Gemara is going to bring a fascinating case.
Rabbi should be doing the bracha on the new light, the light from the end.
Right. They're saying exactly. They're saying the bracha on the light that's at the end, the fire that's at the end of the process, not the original fire. The original fire, they will not say the blessing because that's not coming for the purpose of illumination, of helping you see it. Later on, for multiple, so then you could say
the first stage you could, as the fire evolved into something else.
Right. So either the actual fire at the end was used for multiple purpose. I want to be able to see inside, or is it I lit these little twigs to keep the heat inside the oven, but also to illuminate the area around it. Now, Hanichada, Orashal Beit HaKnesset, a fire that's used to bring light in the shul, in the synagogue. Now, the fire of a synagogue, can I say the blessing of a fire of a synagogue or not? So this one brisa says, of course you could. Why are you having light in the synagogue? So you should be able to see where you're going. So if the light of a synagogue, according to one brisa that's going to say, or a light of a Beit Midrash, why do you have light? Why do you have light in the Beit Midrash? There's a Con Ed bill you have to pay for the yeshiva, for the Beit Midrash. Why do you have light? Sometimes you have lights for heating purpose, but you have lights. The lights of a Beit Midrash, it could be, it's generally used for vision. It could be heat, it could be vision. So the Gemara says, the fire of the shul, the Beit Midrash, you see what happened was you saw this fire. You lit the fire before Shabbat, right? You lit a nice lantern, you put some oil in there, and now it's after Shabbat. Can I say, I need to say Borei Moresh? I have the fire burning. I have the oil lamp burning. How can I say a bracha, Borei Moresh? So the first brayta says I could say a bracha. And the second brayta says, Mevorchen alav. V'tanya idach ein mevorchen alav. When we have two different braytos, one brayta says you say a blessing on it, and one brayta says you don't say a blessing on it. So what's going on? Logically, if it's for visual purposes, you should say a blessing on it. If it's not for visual purposes, you shouldn't say a blessing. So the Gemara says, look, Kasha, very good. So the Gemara is going to introduce a new point. If sometimes they would light, what's the purpose of the light? Sometimes if an Adam Chashuv, a person of prominence comes to the synagogue, so sometimes you would light a light in his honor. Let's say, even if it's daytime. You ever see daytime people they would light the candle. Why are you lighting the candle? You turn on the lights in honor of in honor of Rosh Chodesh, we're turning on the lights. Honor of the prominent man that comes to town. In his honor, we're bringing light. People who sometimes not only people have light at you go out for dinner, so you put fire on the table. So I presume in the fancy restaurants by daytime, they also maybe have a light on the table. Maybe yes, maybe no, you got to tell me. I'm not in these fancy restaurants. Maybe you know more about it than me. Maybe. What's the purpose? Because it's in honor of it's for kavod, atmosphere, not for the light. I don't need the light. Let's say by a wedding, by the Ashkenazim, they go down with a fire. They walk down with a fire at the wedding. It could be you don't need that light, whether it's daytime, nighttime. So if the light is coming for the honor of the person, not for visual purposes, Chacham Avadi came to the synagogue and brought out the lights. I don't say a blessing on that light because that's not for visual purposes. But if it's not for the purpose of an Adam Chashuv, then I would say a blessing. We continue tomorrow.
Very good.
Thank you, everybody, for being involved, and we welcome our new member.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great day for the stove. Yeah, I'm praying with you today. Monday, Thursday, Friday, I go to the college.